Hi everyone, let's now talk about sensation and perception. Let me share my screen. Sensation and perception. Sensation is the stimulus detection process by which our sense organs, missed typo here. Sensation is the stimulus detection process by which our sense organs respond to and translate environmental stimuli into nerve impulses that are sent to the brain. Perception is about making sense of what our senses tell us. It is the active process of organizing the stimulus input and giving it meaning. Sensory process. Sensory transduction, the process whereby the characteristics of a stimulus are converted into nerve impulses. Psychophysics studies the relationship between the physical characteristics of stimuli and sensory capabilities. Stimulus detection, the absolute threshold. Absolute threshold is the lowest intensity at which a stimulus can be detected 50% of the time. The lower the absolute threshold, the more sensitive is the perceiver. Signal detection theory. Decision criterion, a standard of how certain someone must be that a stimulus is present before they will say they can detect it. It can change from time to time depending on such factors, for example, fatigue, expectation, etc. Signal detection theory, concerned with the factors that influence sensory judgments. Difference threshold, sometimes called JND, the just noticeable difference, is the smallest difference between two stimuli that people can perceive 50% of the time. Sensory adaptation, the diminishing sensitivity to an unchanging stimulus. For example, when you swim in the swimming pool, the water may be cold at first when you jump in, because your body's sensor responds to the temperature change. Over time, you become used to the water temperature. You don't feel so cold anymore. Adaptation occurs in all sensory modalities, including vision. Perception, the creation of experience. Bottom-up processing. Individual elements of a stimulus are analyzed and then combined to form a unified perception. It's automatic and driven by the structure of what we are exposed to. It's data-driven. Top-down processing. Sensory information is interpreted by the existing knowledge, concepts, ideas, and expectations. Accounts for many psychological influences on perception. For example, the roles played by our motives, expectations, previous experience, and cultural learning. Perceptions have organizations and structure. Gestalt principles of perceptual organization. Gestalt, German, means pattern, whole, or form in German. Gestalt theories emphasized the importance of figure-ground relations. Our tendency to organize stimuli into a central or foreground figure and a background. Gestalt laws of perceptual organization, similarity, proximity, closure, and continuity. The law of similarity. When parts of a configuration are perceived as similar, they will be perceived as belonging together. The law of proximity. Elements that are near one another are likely to be perceived as part of the same configuration. The law of closure. People tend to close the open edges of a figure or fill in gaps in an incomplete figure so that their identification of the form, in this case a circle in the textbook, is more complete than what is actually there. The law of continuity. People link individual elements together so they form a continuous line or pattern that makes sense. Perception involves hypothesis testing. Perceptual schema. A mental representation or image containing the critical and distinctive features of a person, object, event, or other perceptual phenomenon. There is a big difference between experimental hypothesis and perceptual hypothesis. Perceptual hypotheses are associated with qualia. Perceptions have a mental quality to them, the feelings of blue and green, hot and cold, pain. Perceptual qualia are like flags, issues about the present that identify stimuli and experience in here and now to prepare us for immediate actions. Bayesian inference involves something called conditional probability. The probability that something is the case, given the knowledge that something else is true. For example, that a child has a chicken pox, given that she has lots of spots appearing on her face. It's called conditional probability. This means that we perceive objects in particular ways because our perceptions are based on our knowledge of the world around us, or at least our knowledge of what is happening right now. Our knowledge enables us to form perceptual hypotheses. Object constancy. Perceptual constancies allow us to recognize familiar stimuli under varying conditions. Shape constancies allow us to recognize people and other objects from many different angles. Lightness constancy. The relative lightness of objects remains the same under different conditions of illumination, brightness, such as full sunlight and shade. Size constancy. The perception that the perceived size of objects remains constant, even though images on our retina change in size with variations in distance. Depth and distance perception. Retina receives information in only 2 dimensions, length and width. But the brain translates these cues into 3-dimensional perceptions by using both monocular depth cues, for which only 1 eye is needed, and binocular depth cues, for which 2 eyes are needed. Monocular depth cues, patterns of light and shadow, used to create perceptions of depth in pictures. Linear perspectives, the perception that parallel lines converge or angled towards one another as they recede into the distance. Interposition. Objects closer to us may cut off part of our view of the more distant objects, provides another cue for distance and depth. Height. An object's height provides a source of depth information. Texture. The texture of or grain of an object appears finer as distance increases. Relative size. Another basis for distance judgment. Smaller objects judged to be further away. Motion parallax. If we are moving, nearby objects appear to move faster in the opposite direction than to those further away. Binocular depth cues. Binocular disparity. Each eye sees a slightly different image. Converge. Produced by feedback from the muscles that turn your eyes inwards to view a close object. Perception of movement. Stroboscopic movement. Illusory movement produced when a light is briefly flashed in darkness, and then a few milliseconds later, another light is flashed nearby. For example, illuminated lights on a railway platform or motion pictures. Face perception. The role of facial features and their configuration. The feature theory of face perception. The basic information about a person is perceived from their face, including their gender and age. Then facial expression features are processed. The model of the face produced is consigned to memory, where personal identity is coded along with these features. When we see the face again, the appropriate face recognition unit is activated that we may realize that we have seen the face before. We have recognition. Thatcher illusion is a phenomenon where it becomes more difficult to detect local feature changes in an upside-down face, despite identical changes being obvious in an upright face.